Anonymity has allowed for the proliferation of an internet culture that is, at its core, extremely toxic and violent. It has allowed for uncontrollable expression at the expense of accountability, particularly in the most detrimental cases of cyberbullying and hate speech. Side proposition recognizes this, and we oppose all forms of anonymity on the internet. There are three arguments coming from proposition today. Firstly, why anonymity has allowed for toxic internet culture. Secondly, why we create better advocacy. And lastly, the preemption on the issue of minorities. Before that, I want to make 2 points of framing. Firstly, what is anonymity? These include all methods to conceal your identity online so it is not traceable to real life. For example, people may choose to use a different display name or use a different profile picture or not have that at all. Currently, it is extremely easy to be anonymous, so there's a near infinite ability to do the things that I mentioned, but also a near infinite ability for you to create new emails, new accounts, etc., and set this up like every few minutes or so. Finally, anonymity means you're usually anonymous towards the social media site itself, like Facebook or Instagram. The reason why is because these sites don't necessarily require legal checks that tie you to a certain identity. So oftentimes, Facebook or Instagram can make a profile of you, but they do not tie that to a real identity. Secondly, what is the stance of proposition? We prefer a scenario where people do not become anonymous on social media. Obviously, this doesn't have to be through major breaches of privacy, like having to put in your social security number when you actually make an account, but you'll probably just use your real name or some form of identification card. I think this is just relatively feasible in the same way you set up digital wallet accounts or anything that requires your real identity. First argument then, why anonymity has allowed for toxic internet culture. The problem that we identify from proposition is that the internet right now is just a really, really bad place to be in the sense that is abound with cases of cyberbullying, with cases of hate speech. These run rampant on pretty much all platforms on social media. There are two reasons why. Firstly, there are always people who want to spread their views because they believe they are right, but they do so through very violent means, like radicalists on the internet or extremists as well. The second is that there will always be people with malintent that are, for example, in the case of cyberbullying, who just want to bully other people and for other extremist reasons as to why the internet is toxic right now. The impact of this is obviously massive, because presuming the case of the opposition is something to do with minorities and how they feel safe, if anything, these put minorities more in harm's way because they are exposed to hate speech, because they're exposed to bullying on the internet, etc. This has obvious issues as well, in the sense that maybe it's not a physical harm, but it's simply mental distress that is placed upon you as the receiving end of this toxicity on the internet. The problem here that we identify is that anonymity has allowed for the proliferation of these harms in worse ways. Firstly, it has allowed people to easily do this while escaping accountability. Maybe it is the case that opposition can say there are alternative methods to check against those, maybe the social media site will be the ones who sort of take these accounts down. The problem is that that's only effective in the short term, given that you can just make a new account with a different identity. But also the verification processes of social media take an extremely long time. Even if you have a reporting mechanism, those are millions of reports that you have to sift through daily, they have to decide the legality on. And even if some people can decide to block for themselves, that is still initial exposure to that hate speech that may bring mental distress, and you cannot guarantee that other individuals would not have came across that particular message and be radicalized themselves. The second way that has proliferated this harm is through the formation of hate groups and communities to pass on their harmful ideologies, because you can easily enter these groups, you can easily create new accounts to sustain these groups and sustain their ideologies even if it gets taken down. And so therefore, that's where you see the large things like targeting other people in the community, things like cyberbullying cases arise because you're able to form these hate groups and hate communities. What would have happened without the anonymity, and specifically why is a world without anonymity much better? There are three things to note. Firstly, there's largely more social punishment. So when your name is attached to a post or a comment all the time, you're more likely to moderate your views. The average person would probably not spat out racist views because your name is tied there. There are people who are able to track you towards your employer or make a complaint to the HR department, for example, and get you reported and get you fired. And so these things like social punishment and cancel culture that also affects your relationship with other people are reasons as to why people are likely to moderate and not give out hate speech. Secondly, I would say that the standards by which society judges whether or not to report someone or to attack someone in terms of social punishment is likely to be good. You're not likely to be banning the vast majority of views, but I would say that this mechanism requires collective action. So this suggests that whatever gets taken down by the people or is self-moderated by the individual are things that are largely agreed upon to be egregious. Those things like the use of white supremacist symbols are probably not going to exist like without anonymity, because now like you are actually like accountable for it and you can actually be called out for it. Last thing to say, I think the comparative on our side is that there's likely to be use of constructive criticism. So this large mechanism probably preempts a large part of the opposition case as well. It's not the case that nobody can criticize anybody else when there is no anonymity because they're afraid of the government or because they're afraid of companies. But I would say that the way individuals like convey criticism under our side of the house, knowing that they can be called out for it if they're too offensive, is likely to be constructive criticism. The lack of anonymity, therefore, only prevents the worst and most abusive types of discourse while still maintaining the healthy exchange of opinions that exists under our side of the house. How do you weigh this biggest argument? I think this is the most common occurrence of this debate because things like hate speech unfortunately is rampant on Facebook groups, etc. These are things that are sort of hard to prosecute, and therefore you need to put that into the realm of social punishment and the realm of social media as well. Even if you don't buy that, there are two separate arguments as to why we win. The second argument is why we create better advocacy. And note that what I mean by advocacy is just anything that's speaking out against oppressive structures like the patriarchy in terms of women facing sexual assault, or things like employees speaking out against the evil practices of MNCs. There are two benefits here. Firstly, if you are not anonymous, there's greater credibility associated with you. So if you're a member of minority or someone who has faced assault and you're speaking out for that assault or speaking out against your experiences, there's more gravitas associated with you if your stories are tied to an actual person. It makes it much harder for people of the opposite spectrum to sort of deny your truths and deny what you believe to be true. The problem with anonymity is that it has allowed for things like copycat accusations or like false accusations or baseless criticism in the name of social justice that ultimately harms the credibility of other people who want to participate in discourse. So for example, false accusations from anonymous accounts that may not be run by women ultimately means that other women speaking out against the assault they face are seen as less credible because of the existence of anonymity. Secondly, in terms of benefit, any harm to you makes it much more credible or gives it much more weight. That is to say, if we take the worst case scenario that the internet is very unsafe because there's an oppressive government that's just coming to attack you, it's much easier for the government to take down whoever's behind an anonymous account because nobody else on the internet knows about this person or knows that they're being unfairly treated or being cracked down by the government. Comparatively, under our side of the house, if you are tied to a specific identity and other people know where to track you, other people know where to help you, for example, it's much easier for you to criticize oppressive structures and like be safe because there are other people backing you up. If you're unfairly treated by a company and you're whistleblowing that company and you get fired later on, that is now verifiable evidence that this is a multinational corporation that is stomping on employee criticism compared to under their side where you just take down the anonymous accounts, but this criticism never gets to light. Lastly and finally, on the issue of minorities, so I think it's safer to say that this allows LGBTQ groups to find communities, but I want to flip this and say I think anonymity makes safe spaces like subreddits, private chat rooms, much easier to hijack. It becomes much easier for extremists to enter into these subreddits and spam hate speech or anti-LGBTQ messages, and there is no accountability mechanism given to them, and therefore you never feel safe on the internet, which means that the benefits of opposition are actually harms for our side of the house. Because anonymity makes the internet worse for everyone, we are proud to propose.